a bit, guys.
Were you ever in prison, though?
Nassau County Jail was as far as it went for me.
Right.
But everything that he said, it was the truth. You know, man, you didn't feel it like, oh, this dude is lying. Everything he said, it was the truth. And one of the most genuine people you want to meet, man.
Hey, he knew how to fight for sure.
And he never.
He knew martial arts, man.
He was big into it.
Charlie Murphy could light up a room with laughter so wild it made your ribs ache. But behind that grin, there was a past so raw and brutal, most people never dared to bring it up.
Did you like to fight?
I learned to like it. You know, when it's something that's gonna happen, it's inevitable. You know, it's part of the environment. It's either one way or the other to take it. Either you're gonna ball up into a fetal position or shrimp or whatever.
He wasn't just Eddie Murphy's brother or the man spinning wild stories on stage.
I got rid of my gun because I was gonna solve a problem that was very simple, okay, with a gun, because I got emotional. I got angry, and the first, oh, you gonna talk to me like that? I'm gonna solve it like this.
Charlie came out of New York's darkest corners, raised in chaos, hardened in the streets, and shaped by gang life as a soldier in the King Pythons. Poverty, heartbreak, and violence carved his path, and every scar told a story Hollywood had no idea about.
I think what I really think affected me the most was, you know, when I was 10 years old, my father was murdered.
Right.
Okay? And I didn't realize it, but I guess it had an effect on me, and I became, you know, angry or whatever, you know.
After their father was murdered, young Charlie made himself into Eddie's protector, walking him through high school hallways while carrying the weight of street battles on his shoulders. Those scars ran deep, and they never really left him. And when the polished mask of comedy slipped, people finally realized Charlie Murphy wasn't just funny, he was dangerous.
When he passed away, nobody said Eddie Murphy's brother died. Right. Everybody was like, Charlie Murphy passed away. So he had his true identity, and that was Charlie Murphy.
And always had been. Most of the world got introduced to him through pure comedy magic. On Chappelle's show, Charlie turned storytelling into legend, dropping skits about Rick James and Prince that went viral before viral even existed. Fans couldn't get enough of that raspy voice, those sharp punchlines, and the way he pulled you into every story like you were sitting right there with him. To the casual eye, he was Eddie Murphy's older brother, the sidekick with the unforgettable delivery. But for those paying attention, Charlie was so much more. He was a writer, an actor, and an artist carving out his own lane in Hollywood while carrying a past that never let him sleep easy. But here's the truth. For every laugh Charlie Murphy gave the world, there was another side most people never got to see. A side born from blood, loss, and the ruthless streets of Brooklyn and Long Island in the 1970s. Before the fame, before the spotlight, Charlie's reputation wasn't built in comedy clubs. It was built in back alleys, cold holding cells, and the company of men who lived by fists and respect. He admitted his humor wasn't just jokes, it was fueled by anger.
I think what I really think affected me the most was, you know, when I was 10 years old, my father was murdered.
Right.
Okay? And I didn't realize it, but I guess it had an effect on me. I became, you know, angry or whatever, you know.
Not that playful type you can shrug off, but a deep, boiling anger planted in him when life snatched away his innocence too early. Charlie Quentin Murphy came into this world in 1959, right in Brooklyn's Bushwick neighborhood, a place where survival meant more than smiles. His family was already struggling, and when he was just 5, his parents split. Then came the heartbreak that would define him. At only 10 years old, his father, Charles Edward Murphy, a transit cop who dreamed of becoming a comedian, was murdered.
I'm very protective of both of my younger brothers.
Right. So if I said something bad, you would jump on my...
That wasn't just a tragedy, it was a wound that never healed. Charlie once confessed he didn't even cry the way he should have. He said he just bottled it up, shut down, and kept moving because at 10 years old, what else could you do? But pain like that doesn't fade. It turns into armor. It hardens you, makes you dangerous, and leaves a fire burning inside you forever. And life didn't stop testing him there. Not long after, his mother, Lillian, was struck down with tuberculosis and had to be hospitalized. With nowhere else to go, Charlie and little Eddie were thrown into foster care. Instead of comfort, they met cruelty, enduring abuse at the hands of a foster mother who should have protected them. A child already broken by his father's death, torn away from his sick mother, now forced to protect himself and his little brother inside a stranger's house, that was Charlie Murphy's reality.
We moved to Roosevelt, and then, you know, I was an outcast in Roosevelt because I was from Brooklyn.
Right.
Those weren't the experiences that make a smooth childhood. Those were the fires that forge a fighter. And that's exactly what Charlie became. The protector, the shield, the one who made sure Eddie Murphy was safe when the world tried to crush him. At school, it was simple. If anybody thought about messing with Eddie, they had to go through Charlie first. And trust me, Charlie wasn't afraid to handle it.
And it together with, because that year, for some reason, there was a lot of people, like a mass migration of people from the city moving out to the island.
Right.
So we all became a crew.
That duty, mixed with the rage and pain he kept locked inside, was shaping him into something much harder than just a big brother. It was shaping him into a soldier. When the family eventually moved to Roosevelt, Long Island, after their father's murder.
And you could tell when he was growing up, he was the guy that always had the center of attention.
Yeah.
You could just tell that.
Yeah, you could tell.
Yeah.
He knows how to hold a story.
It looked peaceful on the outside. Pretty lawns, fences, picture-perfect homes. But Charlie later said it straight. It was all fake. Roosevelt in the 70s was violent, unforgiving, and way tougher than people on the outside wanted to believe. Behind those picket fences lurked another battlefield. For a kid like Charlie, already scarred by foster care, already carrying grief, Roosevelt wasn't a safe haven. It was another war zone. Kids from Brooklyn or the Bronx who got dropped into Roosevelt didn't get welcomed, they got tested. And if you weren't ready to throw hands, you were getting stomped out, no questions asked. Charlie himself said,
Sure.
And he never
He knew
wanted-
martial arts, man.
He knew he was big into it.
they moved to Roosevelt, and then, I was an outcast in Roosevelt because I was from Brooklyn, right? But instead of shrinking, Charlie stood tall. He didn't fold. He linked up with other outsiders, built his own circle, and earned his respect the only way Roosevelt kids understood. Kids just like Charlie, outsiders, relocated, carrying scars of their own, linked up in Long Island, and built a crew. They called themselves the King Pythons. That name wasn't just for show, it was survival. Rolling with the King Pythons meant you weren't walking the streets alone. You had muscle, you had backup, and you had people ready to ride for you when things got ugly. Charlie didn't waste time earning his spot. He wasn't just another recruit. He rose fast and became known as Little Boss. That wasn't some random nickname. It meant people trusted him, respected him, and followed his word. He wasn't the loudest, and he didn't need to be the biggest. His confidence alone made people pay attention. And in Roosevelt, respect was everything. Without it, you were a target. With it, you were untouchable. But respect had a price. Being in the King Pythons meant proving yourself daily. That meant fights after school, throwing down on the block, and sometimes stepping into situations where one wrong move could mean death. Roosevelt had crews everywhere, and those crews clashed constantly. Disrespect wasn't brushed off. If someone tested you, you had to clap back hard. Charlie learned early. Backing down wasn't an option, not if you wanted to survive. One story Charlie shared says it all. 9th grade, he's face to face with a classmate who pulls a pistol, presses it straight to Charlie's forehead, and pulls the trigger. The gun misfired. That's the only reason Charlie walked out alive. And he admitted, moments like that weren't rare, they were normal. Living like that didn't just make you cautious, it made you fearless. Once you stared death in the eyes and lived to tell it, you moved different forever. That edge followed him years later. Eddie Murphy even admitted in interviews that kids at school gave him a wide berth. Nobody touched Eddie because they knew his brother wasn't just protective. Charlie was gang affiliated. Eddie said it plain. Charlie was in gangs. Charlie wasn't just tough, he was dangerous. This wasn't only about street fights and throwing wild punches. He studied martial arts seriously, grinding until he earned a black belt in karate, and people in the comedy world backed it up. Donnell Rawlings and others swore Charlie wasn't just talking tough. He knew how to fight for real. They said flat out, Charlie could school UFC fighters on technique. That blend of raw street survival and disciplined martial arts training made him a whole different level of intimidating. But toughness never cancels out consequences. Running with the King Pythons dragged Charlie into choices that scarred him for life. One of the biggest? An armed robbery. He and his crew pulled a gun on a taxi driver, and when Charlie got caught, the court slapped him with 3 years probation. Most people would have taken that as a warning shot, but the streets had their hooks in Charlie deep. Even while on probation, he couldn't stay clean. He picked up more charges: larceny, loitering, petty stuff to some, but deadly serious when you're already skating on thin ice. The judge finally had enough and ruled Charlie out of second chances. The sentence? 10 months in Nassau County Jail. Years later, Charlie admitted himself. Back then, he was just a knucklehead, moving reckless, acting off impulse, never stopping to think about what the price might be. Jail was that price. And yet, even while caught up in the madness, Charlie was searching for more. He got involved with the 5 Percenters, also known as the Nation of Gods and Earths. That's when he took the name Omar Allah. The movement gave him structure, discipline, and identity, something the gang life never fully gave him. It was belonging with purpose. But here's the twist. Charlie's mind was sharp, always questioning, always analyzing.
Yeah. He used to be Eddie's bodyguard when Eddie was like right at the height of his stuff. But Charlie was like martial arts.
Charlie was never the type to just swallow lessons without thinking. He questioned everything, studied it, broke it down, and if it didn't feel real, he walked away. That decision to step back from the 5 Percenters showed something people didn't always catch about him. Charlie wasn't scared to detach when it wasn't authentic. But one thing never changed, his loyalty. Loyalty to Eddie, to his crew, and to the people he rode with. That was his backbone. Jail is supposed to crush you, scare you straight. But when Charlie looked back later, he admitted something chilling. The scariest part of being locked up was that it didn't scare him at all. He didn't fold, he didn't hide. If anything, lockup became the first place where he tested another side of himself.
Well, Neil Brennan tells this story, the co-creator of the Chappelle Show. He tells this story about you, that there was an actual situation where you grabbed a Tech 9 off a dresser and you were going to deal with a situation of some sort.
Inside those county walls, Charlie Murphy started showing hints of the man the world would one day laugh with. He cracked jokes, clowned around, even wrote poems about the inmates and guards around him. Donald Rawlings would later reveal the wild truth. Charlie had never touched a stage before that, but in jail, surrounded by nothing but tension and time, Charlie Murphy found his voice. Still, don't get it twisted. He wasn't just joking his way through. That stretch gave him the edge people would feel years later whenever he walked into a room. He was the guy who had lived through the streets and survived jail without breaking under either. And once you face that, you carry it with you everywhere. Respect, danger, violence. It never leaves your aura. So when the day came and Charlie walked out of jail, he didn't waste a second. No hanging on the block, no slipping into the same patterns. Instead, he walked straight to the Navy recruiter's office. It was 1978. He was only 18 years old, and Charlie Murphy was about to flip his entire story. That's when I became a man, in the military. Those were Charlie Murphy's own words, and you could hear the weight behind them. He admitted straight up, the reason he stayed on the right path was because the Navy cut off all the wrong ones. For a kid raised on gang ties, carrying the pain of a murdered father, and protecting his baby brother in brutal streets, temptation was always waiting. But the military, that gave him something the streets never could. Discipline. And don't get it confused. Discipline didn't soften Charlie, it sharpened him. The Navy put him on a clock, made him wake up on time, take orders, and handle pressure without breaking. And instead of breaking him down, it built him up stronger. You throw a kid like Charlie Murphy into that kind of system and he doesn't fold, he thrives. By the time he walked out after 6 years, Charlie wasn't just tough, he was forged steel, even harder, even smarter, even more dangerous than the boy who had first walked in. And when he came home, the whole game had changed. Eddie Murphy wasn't just Eddie anymore. He was Eddie Murphy, the superstar. Saturday Night Live, blockbuster movies, stand-up tours, he was everywhere, larger than life. And fame like that, it attracts everything. Fans, money, and danger. That's where Charlie stepped in. He went to work as Eddie's security muscle. But let's be real, this wasn't like breaking up schoolyard fights anymore. This was Hollywood. Charlie was now standing guard in rooms full of millionaires, sharks, and people looking to use Eddie's fame for their own gain. Charlie later said it himself, "I was there for the person I loved." But not everybody around Eddie liked that. Charlie wasn't a yes man, and he definitely wasn't playing Hollywood games. If he thought something looked shady, he called it out. And if someone crossed the line, Charlie wasn't afraid to remind them that Eddie Murphy's big brother wasn't just a comedian. He was still that dangerous kid from Brooklyn who knew how to handle himself. Charlie said it himself. If he thought somebody was a threat, he treated them like one.
I used to bully him, but I was like, yeah, you're so tough, but not with a microphone in your hand. And I bullied him so much that he finally went on stage.
And let's be real, most of the people orbiting Eddie Murphy back then weren't ready for that kind of energy. They were Hollywood players used to smiles, handshakes, and fake promises. Not the stare of a man who had actually been in brawls, sat in cells, and stared death right in the face. Even when Charlie eventually stepped away from being Eddie's security, he never lost that edge. He wasn't built to stay in the background forever, but the toughness that got him there never faded. Hollywood might have been lights and cameras, but Charlie carried Brooklyn and Roosevelt in his blood, and that mentality followed him everywhere. Chris Rock once dropped a wild story. Charlie actually showed up to an audition strapped with a real gun on him. That wasn't acting, that wasn't a prop. That was Charlie reminding folks that he wasn't out here pretending. Neil Brennan, co-creator of Chappelle's show, told another moment just as raw. Charlie pulled out a Tech-9 when he thought a situation needed handling. He was ready to deal with it the only way the streets had taught him. It got so real, Eddie himself had to step in, telling him, "This isn't a movie, this is real." Charlie admitted later he almost made the worst mistake of his life in that moment. He got emotional, got heated, and nearly let his instincts take over. Thankfully, he never pulled the trigger. But the fact that he reached for that gun at all told you everything. This was a man whose instincts were wired for survival, not Hollywood politics. Eventually, Charlie put the weapons down for good, and he even said later he was grateful he did. But by that point, he didn't need a gun for respect. His presence alone carried weight. His size, his voice, his scars, his past, they all spoke louder than any weapon ever could. Comedians, rappers, actors, everybody who crossed paths with Charlie Murphy knew one truth. He wasn't just a funny storyteller. Charlie Murphy lived the kind of life most rappers only rhymed about or Hollywood only scripted. He wasn't a character. He was real, forged in violence and survival. And over time, he realized he had to evolve. He even admitted there was a moment when pure anger nearly pushed him into making a fatal mistake with a gun. That wake-up call forced him to grow. He made the decision to stop carrying, to step away from the edge before it swallowed him whole. Then came the break that flipped everything. In 2003, Dave Chappelle and Neil Brennan called him up, and just like that, Charlie Murphy finally had his spotlight. But what made Charlie stand out wasn't just the jokes. Plenty of people were funny. Charlie was different because his comedy came straight from truth. His stories weren't fiction. They were lived experiences. He didn't act like a tough guy for the cameras. He was that tough guy with scars and survival to prove it. And when Chappelle's show aired Charlie Murphy's True Hollywood Stories, it was lightning in a bottle. Take the Rick James sketch. Overnight, it became one of the most quoted comedy skits in TV history. Rick James wasn't just a punchline anymore. He was a cultural moment, etched into pop culture forever. But if you really listen closely, Charlie wasn't just clowning. Charlie wasn't spinning fairy tales. He was telling real stories about how Rick James crossed the line over and over again. These weren't studio-written skits or manufactured anecdotes. Charlie had actually been in those rooms, throwing real punches at a superstar who didn't know when to quit. And according to him, there were plenty more stories too wild for TV. Things America was never going to see. Then came the Prince sketch, a late-night basketball game that sounded way too crazy to believe. Prince and his crew beating Charlie and Eddie's squad on the court, then serving them pancakes afterward. Pure exaggeration, right? Wrong. Eddie Murphy himself later confirmed every single detail. And the wildest part, even Prince co-signed it. He stamped the parody by putting Dave Chappelle dressed as him on the cover art for one of his singles. That's when you knew it wasn't just comedy. These stories were becoming American pop culture history. But what made those sketches legendary wasn't just the ridiculousness, it was Charlie's delivery. He spoke with weight, with danger in his tone, the kind of energy that made you lean in closer. Even when the punchline landed, the aura around him made you believe every word. You laughed, but you also thought, this man really lived it. And Hollywood noticed. When the doors opened after Chappelle's show, nobody looked at Charlie as just Eddie's brother or some sidekick trying to get shine. They knew better. He had lived a full, dangerous, battle-tested life before he ever held a mic. That's why comedians, rappers, and actors respected him differently. He wasn't just chasing a spotlight. He was his own man, and everyone knew not to play with him. By 2006, when Chappelle's show ended, Charlie hit a new crossroads. Donald Rawlings, his close friend in comedy, straight up bullied him into trying stand-up. At first, Charlie wasn't with it. He thought it wasn't his lane. But Rawlings kept pushing, telling him, "You so tough in every other way, but not with a microphone in your hand." That's how Charlie's second act began. It wasn't clean, it wasn't easy. He bombed on stage. He struggled hard. He even admitted those early sets almost spun his career into a tailspin. But Charlie Murphy was never the type to back down from a fight, whether it was in the streets, in jail, or now under the spotlight. Martin Lawrence once gave him advice that stuck. Treat stand-up like another kind of battle. And Charlie listened. He put in the work, writing, rehearsing, touring. Step by step, he started carving his own lane. Soon he was out on the road with the I'm Rich tour, sharing stages with young comics like Bill Burr, who was still grinding his way up at the time. Then came even bigger stages. Charlie toured with the comedy legends themselves: George Lopez, Cedric the Entertainer, D.L. Hewley, Eddie Griffin, the Comedy Get Down tour. Charlie had stepped out of Eddie's shadow for good, standing shoulder to shoulder with giants of the game. But through it all, that edge never faded. He was still a martial artist, still a fighter, still somebody you didn't want to test. Fellow comedians told stories of being on the road with him, watching Charlie break down combat moves with UFC fighters, explaining technique like a seasoned pro. Nobody doubted a word because they knew everything Charlie said came from lived truth. So even when America was laughing at his legendary sketches, even when the spotlight was shining on him bright, the shadows of his past never really disappeared. Charlie Murphy was more than Eddie Murphy's brother, more than a comedian. He was a man forged by violence, loss, gangs, and prison. A man who turned survival into stories that made the world laugh. And yet, if you look close, even at the peak of his comedy fame, you could still see it, that fire in his eyes. Because once you've lived that kind of life, it never truly leaves you. But what do you think? Was Charlie Murphy one of the realest voices comedy has ever seen? Or the most dangerous man to ever step on a stage? Let me know in the comments. And if you made it this far, sound off below. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe if you want more deep dives like this.